If you want to see your name at the beginning of all of our videos, as well as see exclusive content here on the homestead, please feel free to join our Patreon. Memberships start off at just $1 a month. And as always, thank you for your support.
I'm not saying take the advice I am about to give. I am just going to tell you what I did raising rabbits in an apartment. I did not tell my landlord. I just did it. We had hutches in the living room. They were made out of wood with solid bottoms, and I cleaned them out once every 3 days, and if need be, we could hide them in the closet. If you have an apartment or house that has a detached garage, or even an attached garage, that would also be the perfect spot. And again, I'm not saying to take this advice because there's risk and reward to all of it. But if they don't know you have them, do they really exist? Partial joking aside, though, a lot of times if you have an open communication with your landlord, you can sometimes get away with more. If you're going through a third-party rental system, meaning that you don't have contact with the landlord, but a business that is used by the landlord, it might be more difficult. But it just depends on which way you want to go. Do you want to ask for permission or beg for forgiveness? I have covered the abuse point so many times. Go watch my ethical playlist. But what I haven't talked about in a while is the sustainability factor as to why we raise rabbits. You say I don't need to cull out my rabbits to eat them. I don't need to be doing this. Which, if you are in a situation where you don't need to raise animals for meat, you choose to be plant-based, or you have a good grocery store to go to, I am very happy for you. But the truth of the matter is, not everyone has that privilege. And I also don't have the privilege of living in a subtropical or tropical area where we can grow enough veg and fruit to sustain our family. Not to mention I have dogs who need to eat meat. Same with my cats. They need to eat meat. I live on the top of a mountain in a very arid climate. Or is it arid? It might be pronounced arid. Either way, we don't get much rain. We are very close to being a desert. Our wet season is actually during the winter, where our moisture comes from snow. It lands on the top of the caps, and when spring comes, that snow melts and comes down the mountain. All this to say, between our weird wet seasons and how cold we get and how short our growing season is, I cannot grow things appropriately to sustain a family. I can grow potatoes, I can grow squash, I can grow beans. It's enough to feed us for a little while, but not to give us the right amount of nutrients. If we weren't eating our rabbits, we would be eating our chickens, or our quail, or the deer we would hunt, or the fish that we would fish. And if anything happened to where the supply chain broke down, the end of the world per se, we wouldn't be changing much. We would still be sustaining ourselves while other people unfortunately don't have that option. I would cull out all of my mini breeds right then and there. And I would cull out most of my bucks to where I would only have the best of the best. Cutting my numbers down to make sure that we could get through winter with the feed that we currently have and the hay that we have. Long enough to where spring would come and I could start collecting blackberry brambles. I could start growing kudzu. The legume hay that is grown across the street could start to be harvested for cuts and stored the old-fashioned way through scythe and dry. The life we live is not a violent one. It's a sustainable one. One where we take care of our family in our own way, just like everyone else tries to take care of their family. It's not something that you have to like. But it's not something you can also force somebody to stop just because of your proclivities. Your emotions and opinions do not equate to a change in somebody else's life because you disagree. The words ethical and cull do belong in the same sentence together. But first you must understand the different kinds of culls. There is a soft cull, which simply means to remove from the breeding program. So in my barn, if I soft cull something, sometimes I will sell it as a breeder to somebody else. Other people soft cull in the way of pet sales. I myself do not do pet sales. So to use that in a sentence, I could say that I culled Meatloaf here as a brood buck for someone else. He would be a soft cull in that moment. I think the word that you're most getting your head wrapped around is hard cull. In hard culling, we permanently remove the animal by way of butchering. We put them in the freezer to feed our family. And you most certainly can use hard cull in a sentence and it still be ethical. For instance, if a rabbit were to break its back, and I used this example for you earlier, we would cull that animal because it is the most ethical process for a rabbit with a broken back. Just like if an animal had no quality of life, we would cull hard that animal because that is the ethical thing to do when they have no quality of life. If an animal is too old or too sick, again, it is ethical to cull that animal. Culling is a vital part of raising any livestock animal. And I would like to argue that it is unethical to let any animal suffer. And also, when we talk about ethics, we are raising these animals for meat. So if we really want to get into the ethical debate of animals' lives over human lives, one could argue that the ethics of culling an animal out to feed a human is more ethical than letting that human starve. But again, we're just getting into pedantics when it comes to culling. I've said it before, I'll say it again. You don't have to like the process, but it does happen. And it is ethical. I love a good ethics debate, and you have brought up quite a few points, so I'm just going to start working through them until we run out of time. Your first point, you are 100% correct. Having a cat or dog as a pet is a privilege. And as a privilege, it's important for us to be able to feed our animals, which is one of the reasons we raise rabbits. Though we do have a secondary source of food for them, such as kibble, we prefer to feed them fresh meat and veg and fruit as often as possible, with heavy emphasis on quail and rabbit. So because we have them, we feed them the animals we raise. Especially my female husky, who is extremely hard to keep weight on. You also say that no one forces me to live in the middle of nowhere. The economy would love to disagree with you. Moving is no small feat in this economy. And many people are stuck in the places that they've grown up with and lived for many generations due to generational poverty. Many people never move out of their hometown. I was lucky enough to be in the army and kind of decide where I wanted to settle afterwards. And I chose a property that we could afford and that we really loved. But to move again would be a feat. It would be of my own accord, my own money, my own profits. And I don't have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars just lying around to move. Somebody else in my comments also brought up the fact that there is a housing shortage in many places. That even finding places to rent is nearly impossible, and if you can find them, it's not the best when it comes to financials. We are seeing a huge rise in payments when it comes to rental rates. And then once we do move into a city, be it an actual city or the suburbs, when you're looking at raising things and growing things, it's very hard. Especially if you want to continue to be sustainable. And with the rising costs of groceries, losing that sustainability is a very bad idea. I mean, look at the cost of eggs right now. I know you have proudly proclaimed veganism in multiple posts. So look at the rising cost of even potatoes. Be them in French fried form in bags or just Spudniks. Again, the costs are outrageous. And I'm going to argue the same point I have always argued. I raised rabbits in my apartment. If I moved to the city, if I moved to the suburb, it would mean even more so that I would raise rabbits for my own benefit. Because they are sustainable in a small area like a garage, like a shed. So this would not stop. Before I get started on this little point right here, I just want to say I have nothing wrong with veganism. I have quite a few followers on here who are vegan, and they live their life, and they enjoy what they do, and that is perfect. And they don't push that on others and let others live and be, and I love that as well. But when we argue that veganism is the best move for the environment, you're not taking a lot of things into consideration. For one, logistics. Logistically speaking, a lot of people don't eat locally within their season when it comes to fruit and veg. There's a lot of imports, both from out of state and out of country. So when we look at environmental impact, there is more negative environmental impact through importations compared to people raising their own animals sustainably in their own backyard, growing the food for their animals. Or people who are using local feed and local hay from a local feed mill. Especially when we're looking at humans who are living in an area of a food desert or an isolated area, like just in general. Or people who don't live in tropic and subtropic areas and have to really plan out their growing season if they can grow anything at all. Culturally speaking, there are a lot of indigenous people who live up in the Arctic Circle who rely heavily on the oceans and the meat that the oceans provide. Not only does that include fish, but it includes whale, it includes seals, some include sharks. It is ingrained not only in their culture, but their survival. So when we get instances like we couldn't move these food sources to people who are in these areas, who cannot move from these areas, veganism is not possible. You also argued the point of there is a lot of farming that goes on when it comes to deforestation and those kind of things. That is not the fault of backyard farmers. That is the fault of very large companies. And we see it more with industrialism. Same with pollution. Industrialism is the biggest contributor to pollution. People taking down trees is a huge problem, but discouraging people to grow food, be it animals or just food in general, in their backyard to sustain themselves, only makes them more reliant on those companies who deforest. You also talk about crop yield and how most crops are grown to feed our animals. And again, this goes into climate. This goes into calorie ratio yields. And again, this goes into supply demand. Many vegetables and fruits do not have the calorie density necessary to sustain the world's population compared to animal products. And again, this has to do with growing cycles and where food can be grown. Let's talk bedding and why we don't use it. For the first point of which you brought up when it comes to ear mites, it's not necessarily about completely eradicating a problem, but mitigating it. You see, when it comes to ear mites can be carried in on hay, straw, or pine bedding, depending on where you get it from. And it doesn't matter how long it's in the cage, an outbreak can happen very easily with bedding. And once you have an outbreak of ear mites, especially in a large rabbitry, it's very hard to control. Not to mention, even if you do get it under control when it comes to individual rabbits who can pass it back and forth, if you have any kind of wood surfaces within your barn, those mites can live there. So it's not necessarily a cleanliness problem, but a problem of introduction into your rabbit management. Cases of ear and fur mites in our rabbitry are extremely rare and easy to handle when found, if found. And then also when it comes to bedding, we're looking at disease management process. Even with rotating out daily bedding changes, we're introducing EC, coccidiosis, and other things into the rabbitry that are easier to control on a wire setup. Not to mention, depending on where you get your straw or your hay, you can introduce RHVD2 into the barn. And in an area like mine, where this is an extremely common outbreak, which could wipe out the entirety of your barn, the fewer introductions, the better. The problem I have with bedding is even when you clean it out appropriately, a lot of times you're not giving the space of time for your animal to dry off their paws. And when their paws aren't dry and they're able to sit on a flat surface ground, even for a 24-hour period, it can cause things such as urine scalding. So now you have to deal with chemical burns from the urine scalding. And if the fur falls off the bottom of the feet, now you are dealing with sore hocks, and that's both on a bedded area or on wire because that fur is no longer covering the foot. But if you want to keep your rabbits on a solid bottom, that's perfectly fine. Manage your management program the way in which it works for you. But when we look at doctrine out of Ohio State University, Michigan State University, and Texas AMU, from multiple sources and studies, wire is the best way to raise rabbits with the least amount of worries when it comes to disease, body condition, and mortality. Get even more controversial, but I look forward to your pedantics in the comments. And I think you'll know what my first question will be. I suppose this is what you mean when you say that my animals are pacing and that this is a sign of overcrowding and cruel conditions. But understand that right now I am in their cage getting ready to feed them and collect their eggs. I'm aggravating them. Compared to here, where they don't know where I am, and I'm leaving them alone and they're chilling, I would say this isn't pacing, this is very calm and not in the least a bit overcrowded. Nor is this cruel because they're in the garage, where they are warm, they are dry, they are safe. Let's talk quail bands. So there are a few options you can use when it comes to quail bands and the management of telling quails apart. If you are simply looking for a distinction between ages, zip ties are amazing. You can get like 500 zip ties for $5 on Amazon. I love it. And that is the system I used to use. I would use colored zip ties to tell at what age a quail was born to be able to switch them out. And you can say purple is January, blue is February, and black is March. And you can continue that on. Or you can do something as simple as in the year of 2020, we had red bands. In the year of 2021, we had yellow bands. But if you were looking for an inspection quality band, meaning that it has the colors and numbers to dictate which quail is which, it's the first search on Amazon. I just searched up quail leg bands, and it was like 500 leg bands. There were 3 different colors with a bunch of different numbers, and it was like $10. Both the official leg bands and the zip ties work really well. It's just a question of what is going to work best for your purpose. Are you looking to get your NPIP? Or are you just doing backyard quail tending, where you only need to know how old your quail are within a clutch? I was on my live tonight, and there was a lot of discussion around genetics. And not just your normal average genetics, but genetics when it comes down to teeth and fur pads. And functional genetics over how a rabbit looks when it comes to type. And in a lot of instances, when we're talking about the standard of perfection, and we're talking about fur, and we're talking about body, there's a lot of things left out that are more important, such as teeth or how the feet are formed. Because when it comes down to it, those things are very important, and I would argue even more important than how a rabbit looks. And there was a lot of talk how a lot of rabbits, especially within the pet community, are a genetic mess because there are a lot of breeders that don't care necessarily about these genetic and physical factors, but about the money that lines their pockets. And unfortunately, I would have to agree with the people in my comments section tonight. I suppose I just reflect on this from a standpoint of if you are breeding rabbits, make sure you are checking your rabbits' teeth and that they're sitting appropriately. Make sure that you're checking your rabbits' feet and that they are clean and free of any kind of damage or sore hocks. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to our rabbit breeding program, these things are extremely important to the health of our rabbits. A genetically clean rabbit is one that is going to grow appropriately and pass on those good genetics to their kit. And I've said it once and a million times, but it costs just as much to feed a spectacular rabbit as it does to feed a genetic mess. In fact, I'm pretty sure it costs more to feed a genetic mess, but you get the idea.